Club Bear fam, and welcome back to my channel. Today we are going to be talking about the biggest money mistakes that I have made in my journey. I started my money journey back in 2018. It was actually October 2018 when I decided, you know what, it's probably time for me to figure out this whole money thing. And since October 2018, I've been able to increase my net worth by about $300,000 in that time frame. So that's a little under 4 years, but I made some serious mistakes along the way, so I wanted to share those with you. Logan decided she wanted to join the conversation as well, so that's my dog Logan. We are actually at the beginning of our road trip across the western half of the United States, and we're currently in an Airbnb in Omaha, actually right outside of Omaha in Council Bluffs. We will get right to it, but be sure to hit like and hit subscribe. It helps my channel out a lot, and I appreciate it. All right, so mistake number one is that I spent way too much time focusing on debt freedom. Now, debt freedom, I think, is something that everyone really uses as a gateway into the personal finance community. But once you start learning a little bit more about debt freedom and paying off all debt, no matter what the cost, no matter what the interest rate, no matter what, you start to realize there's kind of some holes on this whole philosophy of being debt-free at any cost. Like many other people who have started this journey, I thought debt freedom was the ultimate thing to do. It was like the ultimate path to freedom. But I soon realized after spending about 2 years focusing only on debt freedom that I was actually missing half of the story. The thing is while debt freedom's great in terms of not having to pay anybody to live your life on a month-to-month basis, it's not doing all of the work. Debt freedom is only one half of the financial independence journey. You also need to be building wealth through investing. And even though in the years that I spent paying off debt, I was reading a lot about personal finance and doing everything I could to optimize my journey, I knew in the back of my mind that I was supposed to be investing, but I didn't want to. I was afraid to. I thought that ultimately investing was something that was super risky and super scary and something that only smart people could do, smarter people than me at least. And so I kept just kind of like kicking the can down the road and be like, you know what, maybe I'll do it eventually, but it's not something that I want to do right now. I want to focus on being debt free. So in the first 2 years of my journey, I actually paid off over $40,000 of debt. Now you may hear that and be like, that's awesome. Why would that be one of your regrets? And the reason that that's such a huge regret for me is because my interest rates on the student loan debt that I was paying off was so low. When I was paying off my debt, my interest rates were around 4.5%, and then they went down to 3.5%, and yet I continued paying that debt off in hordes of cash. I was spending about $2,000 a month just on paying off my low interest debt. But again, the more and more I learned about personal finance and financial independence and wealth building and retiring early, the more I could not ignore the fact that paying off low interest debt didn't really make that much sense for me. I was 27 years old when I started my journey, so I was spending my 20s paying off debt rather than using the benefit of time to invest. So like I said, I paid off over $40,000 of debt in those 2 years, this low interest debt. And what I realized is that that mistake actually ended up costing me about $1 million over the course of about 35 years. Now you're probably wondering, Chloe, how is that even possible? How could paying off $40,000 of debt in 2 years actually cost you $1 million? Think about it this way. If I had invested that $40,000 instead of putting it on debt, I would have almost $280,000 invested right now, but instead, I only have about $228,000 invested. Now that may not seem like a lot, but let's look at what that ends up being over the course of 35 years. In 35 years, that $228,000 could be about $3.8 million. That's assuming an 8.5% average annual return over those 35 years. And keep in mind, that's if I've never put in another dollar and I just leave my $228,000 invested. Now, if we look at having $280,000 invested right now and then having it grow for the next 35 years, having an 8.5% average annual return, we're looking at me having about $4.8 million instead. That is $1 million difference that I could have had I not been focusing so hard on paying off my debt early. Now, the reason that I personally would have not paid off my debt early is because my interest rate was at 3.5% when it's at its lowest. It's currently at 3.5% interest rate as well. When the average annual returns of the stock market are around 10% a year, that means by focusing on putting all of my money on this low interest rate that would give me a return of 3.5%, instead, I am actually missing out on an extra 6.5% had I invested that money in the stock market instead. Because think about it this way, if you have a 3.5% loan, when you pay that loan off early, essentially the money you are saving is that 3.5% interest rate that you would have been paying. Now, when you're investing that money, the money you would be making, if we're looking at the average annual returns of the entire stock market over the last 100 years, you're looking at making 10% on average per year. When you look at the two numbers, would you rather make 3.5% interest on average, or would you rather make 10% interest on average? It's pretty much a no-brainer when you look at the numbers. Now, I recognize that this is not a path for everyone. A lot of people feel a lot of anxiety when it comes to their student loan debt or other types of debt. And if you have high interest rates on your debt, it may not make that much sense for you to be investing more than you're paying off your debt. I think no matter what, everybody should be investing whether or not they've got high interest debt, because there are years when we get 40% returns in the stock market and you are missing out on those gains in the stock market if you are not invested. Plus, in addition to that, time is a huge essence of why you need to be invested in the stock market, because the more you are invested, the longer you are invested, the more your money is going to work for you. The reason that time is such an important aspect of it is because of the way that compound interest works. Let's say you had $100,000 invested. Well, if you made 10% on $100,000, then you're making $10,000. If you only have $1,000 invested, then you're making $100. But think about it as the time stacks onto this. So again, going back to the $100,000 example, let's say in year one, you have that $100,000 invested, you make 10% on your investments, and you leave it in your investment accounts. That $100,000 you have invested turns into $110,000. Now, let's say in year two, you make another 10%, then instead of you only making $10,000, you now have more money invested. You have $110,000 invested. So when you make 10% off of that money, you're actually making $11,000 instead of just $10,000. So again, if you don't touch that money stays in there. And now the money that you made is also making you money. And as the years go on and your money earns you more money, the compound effect is just insane. But you cannot have those insane compounding effects if you don't give your investments time to grow. So in a nutshell, that's why I would personally prefer to have not paid off all of my debt so early. I would have instead maybe split the difference, or really just focused on paying my debt off slowly so that I could be investing that extra money instead. The second biggest mistake that I have made in my personal finance journey is getting into private money lending before I knew anything about investing. Private money lending is the act of a person like you or me deciding to act essentially as a bank for a business or a business endeavor. In my situation, I decided to loan some money to a friend who was flipping houses. This friend was then going to use that money to flip houses, and then when the houses sold, I was supposed to get a 20% interest return on my investment. Now, I did this back in 2018 when I knew literally nothing about investing, and I remember doing it a few times and thinking, wow, this is too good to be true. And the thing is, it was too good to be true. So in 2018 and in 2019, I was throwing my money into this person's business. I think I started with $5,000, and then I gave him another $5,000, and then I sold my car and I gave him that money too. So by now, I'm probably about $30,000 invested into it, and he owes me about $60,000. I was doing this private money lending for about 2 years, and then the pandemic hit. And that's when this is too good to be true, it turned out to be true, in that it was too good to be true.
They ask you how you are, and you just have to say that you're fine, and you're not really fine, but you just can't get into it because they would never understand.
So when the pandemic hit, things were still going fine for about 9 months or so, but then there started to be labor shortages, and then there started to be lumber shortages. Because of that, I have now not been paid back my money, and it's been almost a year since it was due back to me. Now, the contractor on this project who has my money has said over and over again that the money is going to come to me. Whether or not it actually does is kind of up in the air at this point. I've kind of accepted the fact that I've probably lost this money on this investment, but it has taught me something. It made me realize that I was probably 26 at the time, I think. Me putting money into this investment at that age, what I would tell myself now is like, you need to fully understand the risks involved here before you decide to put this money into it. And you need to also be okay with potentially losing this money. And that's what I would tell anybody who's interested in getting into an investment that has a lot of risk associated with it. For me, private money lending is one of the most risky investments that you can do, even with somebody that you trust. You're essentially investing a chunk of money into one business, and whether or not it takes off or not is entirely up to the person that is doing the work, that is doing the job, the small company that you're investing in. If you want to do that, that's great, but you need to understand the risks, and then you need to be comfortable only really investing the amount of money you feel comfortable potentially losing. So those are my 2 biggest mistakes that I wish I had known more about before I had decided to do, and hopefully learning from that will help you decide not to do those or to go into those decisions a little bit more informed. I'm only gonna share 2 today because I'm only in Omaha for 1 more day, so I wanna take Logan out, do a little bit of exploring before we head off to Denver tomorrow. But what were some of the biggest mistakes that you feel like you made in your personal finance journey? Share them down in the comments below, because then other people can learn from them. But as always, thank you so much for watching. As you guys probably know, I am really active on social media. So if you're not already following me on TikTok and Instagram, be sure to give me a follow there. And if you haven't already liked and subscribed, be sure to do that for me. It helps me out a ton, and I seriously appreciate it. And it's free to you. So thank you so much for doing that. And I'll see you guys next week.